Hello, health science students. I'm going to look at the endocrine system. So endocrine are glands that secrete a hormone into the bloodstream, and it kind of works on an as needed basis. There is two classifications. There's steroid hormones and non-steroid hormones, and the basic difference is they just act in a different way to get inside the cell, and I'll talk about the distinction between the two of them in a little bit. So endo just means within. That prefix means within. So that means they're within the body. You actually do have exocrine glands, which means without. So an example of an exocrine gland would be your sweat glands. So they release a liquid outside of the body. So this just means they're inside the body and they release some kind of a hormone into the bloodstream just to help you maintain homeostasis in your body. And that works on negative feedback, which is a corrective mechanism. So, and this is just like an example of one type of negative feedback, but it might help you understand it a little bit. So consider this scenario. The level of glucose in your bloodstream drops, and you need glucose in your cells to meet the demand for ATP, which is energy in the cell. And the body detects this with a receptor, and these receptors then release hormones, which are chemical messages that start this feedback mechanism. And then the hormones will travel to the target tissue where they're needed and initiate a corrective response. So in this case, the corrective response would be the secretion of more glucose into the bloodstream. So here's a diagram just so you can kind of understand this a little bit more. This is what we call a negative feedback loop. So I guess we could start anywhere here since this is a cycle of events. So when you eat, your blood glucose goes up. It goes up a little bit higher. So here, that's the stimulus, right? And then that gets detected by the insulin secreting cells of the pancreas. So the pancreas secretes a hormone insulin, and that causes liver cells to take up the glucose and store it. So it's taking that glucose out of the bloodstream and storing it as a substance called glycogen that it can use later on. So the body cells will take up this glucose. So as the body cells take up this glucose, the glucose levels in the blood decline and insulin release stops, and that's called negative feedback. So that returns you to normal. So if that stimulus happens again, these events are going to happen again. So your body constantly wants to return you to normal, or what we call equilibrium. And that's where hormones come in, because they initiate the necessary response to return you to normal. Some people understand it really well when they think about a furnace in their home. That's a really good analogy for a negative feedback. So you set your desired temperature, say you like it at about 20 degrees in your house. You set it there. When it gets too cold in your house, because it's colder than that outside, then your furnace kicks in and it sends out enough heat to bring it up to 20 again. So that's your set point or your equilibrium. When you're up to 20 degrees where you want it, then the thermostat gets triggered and it shuts off the furnace. So the heat is feeding back negatively on the source of heat. And when the temperature drops back below the set point, then the negative feedback is gone and the furnace comes back on. The same thing could be said if you had central air. If it was, you had your temperature set at 20, but it was too hot outside, then your central air conditioning would come on and bring it back down. So it's a set point. It's like your body has set points that it wants to be at, whether it is body temperature or glucose in the blood or pH levels of the blood or oxygen levels. There's always a set point that your body wants to be at, and these hormones will help to bring you back to where you should be. And that's how that works. So, next thing I want to do, hopefully you understand that, but if you don't, you can ask or you can read more about it in your textbook. Um, Next thing I want to do is just kind of go through some of the endocrine glands and the hormones associated with them. So this is a cross section of your brain, or somebody's brain, maybe not yours, but they all look pretty much the same. So here, what you're looking at is your brain stem there, and right at the very tip of the brain stem is your pituitary, and it's sometimes called the master gland of the endocrine system because it controls the functions of the other endocrine glands. The pituitary gland is no larger than a pea, and it's located right here at the base of the brain. So something very small is very powerful. So we call it the master gland, and some scientists don't really like that term, but it's how I'm going to refer to it. The pituitary gland regulates the other glands, the thyroid, the adrenal glands, the gonads, and it also acts on organs and tissues of the body. For example, the human growth hormone it secretes stimulates growth by stimulating cell division in muscle and bone. Here's another interesting endocrine gland. This is the thyroid gland, and you can feel this one sort of at the base of your throat. Well, maybe you can't feel it, but it's there. You can feel it if it's inflamed. And then these little guys here, these tiny little guys, those are called the parathyroid. So I will let you read through this on your own because you can read. I don't have much time. This picture here that my face is covering is a picture of a person with a thyroid gland that isn't working properly because um, he's had hasn't had enough of a substance called sorry, iodine. Yeah. So the main reason you need iodine is because of the thyroid gland. And this is called a goiter right here. This is just when the thyroid isn't working properly. And these are the parathyroids right here, tiny little pea-like glands that these guys here work to regulate different mineral levels in the blood, like calcium and phosphate. And increased parathyroid hormone increases blood reabsorption and levels plasma calcium. And the pancreas is the next one here. And I've already talked about the pancreas, if you remember when we were talking about the digestive system, but it also has a role to play in the endocrine system. So it produces insulin, which is probably most of you have heard of, and also its kind of counterpart, which is called glucagon, which regulates metabolism. So pancreas production of insulin and glucagon, well, you can read, so I will let you read that. Um, and then I just make the distinction between type 1 and type 2 diabetes, which is when that insulin production or uptake isn't working properly and what's happening there. But maybe it would be helpful to go through this diagram here together for type 1 diabetes. So here we have the stomach changes food into glucose, so that's happening here. Um, technically this diagram isn't quite correct because this would start happening up in the mouth. But anyways, the carbohydrates are being broken down into glucose. The glucose are entering the bloodstream, and then glucose will be building up in the bloodstream here. And the pancreas here is making not enough insulin, or maybe even no insulin, and it's not able to take that glucose out of the bloodstream and store it as glucagon. So you're getting like little or no insulin. When you have type 1 diabetes, your insulin production is either non-existent or just not enough. And so glucose will build up in the bloodstream. And that's that's not well, that's not good. It's not caused by eating too much sugar at all. The body's defense system may attack the insulin making cells by mistake, but we don't know why. So this used to be called juvenile diabetes. We call it type 1 diabetes now, but people are usually diagnosed with this before the age of 20, like in their childhood. You have it. And then the other type of diabetes is type 2 diabetes. And again, I'll just go through this series of events here because this is helpful to understand the difference between type 1 and type 2. So the stomach, again, just like, well, it's not necessarily just the stomach, but anyways, food, the carbohydrate is broken down into glucose molecules. Glucose molecules enter the bloodstream, right? And in this case, the pancreas makes insulin as it should, and those little yellow dots are indicating the insulin. But the insulin enters the bloodstream as it should to take up this glucose and store it in body cells, but the glucose can't get into the cells of the body, and glucose ends up building up in the blood vessels. So the insulin the pancreas secretes is either not enough, or the body's unable to recognize the insulin and it just doesn't use it properly. When there isn't enough insulin, or the insulin is not used as it should be, glucose can't get into the body cells. So it's not taken up and it's not stored in the body cells. And that's going to be the difference between type 1 and type 2. If your project that you end up doing is on diabetes, you're going to tell us a lot more detail than that, but that's it in a nutshell. Now, I see I'm at about the 13-minute mark here, so I think I'm going to go ahead and finish this video off. And no, I think I got just enough time to talk about the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands sit just like little hats on top of the kidneys. And they have two separate sections, just like the kidneys do. They have a medulla, which just means the middle, and they have a cortex. Now, in this case, the medulla and the cortex each release different hormones. The medulla is responsible for producing epinephrine, or what we call adrenaline, and then its counterpart that brings you back to homeostasis, and that's the norepinephrine. And these hormones regulate heart rate, blood pressure during stressful times. And the adrenal cortex, so the outer part of the adrenal glands, produces other hormones necessary for fluid and salt balance in the body. So I am going to leave that there and enjoy the rest of your day.